Hello, and welcome to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and the Global Journalism Seminar Series. This is the last one of the term, and in fact the year, and we're really pleased to have this particular panel to cover the bigger story of the year, the Pandora Papers. The Pandora Papers, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is a cross-border collaborative project coordinated by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, who gained access to more than 11.9 million confidential files and led a team of more than 600 journalists from 150 news outlets. This team spent 2 years sifting through the documents, tracking down sources, digging into court records and other public documents to frame these stories. The leaked records they were working with came from 14 offshore services firms from around the world that set up shell companies and other offshore nooks for clients, often to seek their financial activities in the shadows. It's an extraordinarily complex project, and today I'm delighted to have three key players. First of all, Will Fitzgibbon, senior reporter with the ICIJ and the coordinator of the ICIJ's partnerships with journalists in Africa and the Middle East. Will was part of many of the ICIJ's largest investigations, including the Panama Papers, the FinCEN files, and the Pandora Papers. His Pandora stories referred to the corruption in the Dominican Republic sugar industry, secret assets held by the Kenyan president, Kenyatta's family, and the tactics of American tax havens, amongst others. He helped coordinate the coverage as well. Alyssa Lopez from the Philippines has been writing stories from Manila since 2015. This is the first biggest project of this kind that she's worked on, but she reported for the Filipino editions of Entrepreneur and Esquire magazine and the Hong Kong-based newspaper publication South China Morning Post. She's currently contributing to the 30-year-old non-profit media organization, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, and her Pandora stories revealed an undeclared offshore company owned by the Transport Secretary, Arthur Tagade. And Umar Chima from Pakistan, who's a veteran of these kind of projects, an investigative reporter for the Pakistani newspaper, The News. In 2008, he won a Daniel Pearl Journalism Fellowship, becoming the first Pearl Fellow to work at the New York Times. His Pandora stories revealed more details about how a fake diploma operation worked to evade banking regulation and found links between the Prime Minister Imran Khan's address and 2 offshore company registrations. Thank you and welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you. Will, I'm going to start with you as the coordinator of this project to give a brief overview, as brief as you can be, on the Pandora Papers project and how you compiled the team and how soon you realized how soon you understood what you were looking for.
Thanks very much, Mira, and thanks to everyone at Oxford for the invitation to speak about this. I think the first thing to say about the Pandora Papers is we couldn't have done this if this was the first time we'd done this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The Pandora Papers was possible because ICIJ and many of the journalists we worked with, including Umar, including members of Alyssa's team, had worked on similar projects before, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and Swiss Leaks. And all of those projects really had been growing in scale and size that enabled us to do something like the Pandora Papers, which was more complex in the data that it represented and more complex and potentially more unmanageable in the scale of the collaboration. 600 journalists is a lot of reporters. Add to that the fact that we could not meet in person as we usually try and do because of COVID-19. Really meant that it could have been a huge challenge. Thankfully, ICIJ has the experience with this and the technological tools in place that mean that really as soon as we got the documents and as soon as we realized, oh my goodness, 12 million files, that's far too much for any one newsroom to go through, we were able to put in place the motors that ICIJ has become accustomed to putting in place. And we can go into those specifics later. But, you know, from a practical perspective and in terms of anyone out there thinking how they can do an investigation of this scale themselves, my advice would be good luck, but don't try and bite it off all at once.
Don't start here. Would be Alyssa, let me go to you because this is the first time you've worked with the ICIJ on this scale project. Tell me a little bit about how you came on board and what you did and what you're thinking, what you were feeling as you joined.
Yeah, the first time I heard about this, I was shocked, surprised, then excited to dig in and start, investigating and looking at potential people that we can find. At first, I was honestly overwhelmed. Will mentioned about the technology that ICIJ had. I think a big part of what made the work so thrilling, but also, well, not easy, but kind of comfortable in a sense, was because of the technology that they had that allowed our research to move and work so seamlessly. It allowed us to actually tinker different, um, I guess, variations of the report that we wanted to check, and it allowed us to explore different angles. So yeah, I was very excited, especially as a young journalist, to work on this.
Thank you. And Uma, this is your third project of this scale with the ICIJ, is that right?
Yeah, I have to count. I think it's a fifth rather.
Fifth, sorry,
you know.
sorry.
Yeah.
Did you kind of tell me a little bit about what you did with the Pandora Papers, and again, what was different in the approach from your end?
Yeah, in terms of size and scale, it was the biggest, not for ICIJ, it's for us as well. I mean, in terms of the Pakistanis we could find in the papers, and the diversity we had, because, we found people of, different professions that we didn't have in Panama Papers. But one benchmark that we set in Panama Papers are actually Panama Papers set it for us. We found the children of the sitting prime minister in Panama Papers. We did not have either prime minister or his family members in Pandora Papers. So when there is such kind of leak, people start raising hopes, and they realize that now this time another prime minister is going to be axed due to this leak. That was not the case. However, for the first time, we found that there were several cabinet members, several associates of the prime minister. They were in it. In addition to them, and the sitting bankers, the prime minister's finance team members, like finance minister, his tax advisor, they were in it. Or more to it, in another first, we had some retired generals as well. So overall, we realize, as my personal experience, I realized that it was more explosive, and it should have a far-reaching impact.
How did you feel about your safety and the safety of your colleagues, Umar, especially working where you are with this paper? Did you feel safer or more under threat working here than you did on the Panama Papers?
Honestly, I didn't have this realization when we did the Panama Papers.
Okay.
When Prime Minister's family was there, I didn't have that realization. But this time, during the Pandora Papers, we were really much concerned about it, and we negotiated some safety protocols and how to approach different targets, because we didn't want things to prematurely leak, and the people should not realize that who else is in it. So we had a protocol in place in order to mitigate such kind of threats.
Okay, thank you. And Alyssa, because you're working on this in the year that Maria Ressa from Rappler won the Nobel Peace Prize, in a very clear statement that journalism is under threat and needs kind of very public defending. What was the mood in your newsroom, and how did you feel about these two issues?
I must say, in the course of our reporting, we didn't feel the threat. But then after the report was made, I think that's when it made clear how challenged and how much endangered the press is because of the threat that was made against us. So when the report was made, the office of the president of Transport Secretary Arthur Tugade threatened to press charges against us because of the report. So yeah, I think we felt it after the report was made, not during. Yeah. And for a reporter like me who had received or who had an encounter like that for the first time, it was quite unsettling.
And what happened, and I'm really interested in this and the role the ICIJ plays, and Will, feel free to jump in here. When you do receive these kind of legal threats as a result of the reporting, is there a protocol? What do you follow, and do you get support? Will, do you want to?
Well, I think Umar and Alyssa will probably be able to speak better in terms of what it means practically. You know, everyone should know that ICIJ works very much on a principle of editorial independence. So ICIJ is not editing stories. We're not controlling who says what. As soon as a journalist like Umar or Alyssa are brought onto the project, they could write 1,000 stories, or they could write one story in the form of a cartoon. We don't, you know, we're also limited, practically speaking, and for legal reasons, by how much we can insert ourselves and be involved in, you know, legal protection matters. What we do around the world, and I do this a lot as a coordinator of our partnerships in Africa and the Middle East, is have early conversations with groups like Reporters Without Borders and tell them, hey guys, something's coming down the pipeline. Please be aware. Here's what we can tell you without disclosing too much. It'd be great if XYZ systems can be in place. You know, I'd love to hear Alyssa and Umar's thoughts on the practical value of what collaboration can bring to journalist security. Something that I often say, but I don't always necessarily have the meat to back it up, is, you know, we like to think that it's a lot harder for a bully, be it a politician or a billionaire, to go after one journalist when that journalist is working on his or her own, rather than if that journalist is working in a team of 400 or 600. So I wonder if kind of Alyssa and Umar felt that in this particular case. I know in the Pakistani case, because there was lots of international reporting and collaboration, including with ICIJ reporters on some of those stories, that those concerns about Pakistani reporter safety were definitely discussed widely at ICIJ offices.
Yeah, Will, you are absolutely right. And I realize that this collaboration that not only makes the story impactful, it also is a kind of insurance against threats. And even the pressure, I often wonder that, for example, had I been doing it story single-handedly, if I am the alone one who were doing it, so the first thing the powerful actors would do, they would approach my publisher and ask him that, please stop the story. So when they received a question from ICIJ, they realized that now it's beyond their reach. The best they can do, they can just better answer the questions, because that was the only opportunity for them. They could not have stopped it. You know, absolutely, you know, this is right. And the other thing was that incidentally and interestingly, and for me, sadly, my publisher was also in the Pandora Papers. And he was my biggest concern, that how will he react? Because, you know, I thought that if we could not run his name, we won't be able to run others' name, because, you know, just a thought in the mind that what if somebody would come to know, and more to it, because it was ethically wrong for us, because how could we name the other people? So initially, my publisher was reluctant. He said that he won't, you know, actually his company was already closed. So he said it's a matter of past. So, you know, there is no point answering such questions. But we pressed him on it. And thanks to him, you know, he is very democratic. This is what we found. And this is that gave us courage to, you know, confront him. And finally, he gave the answer. So when somebody would approach him, you know, mostly from the business side, business community, because there were many businessmen in it. So they would ask that Umar has sent us the question. So can you stop the name? Can you stop our names? Is there any way possible? So he had a very simple answer. Yeah, that my own name is being run. So how can I stop your names? So in a way, you know, the collaboration helped us a lot, just to, you know, mitigate pressure from the powerful actors, and just naming our publisher, that helped us name other people from the business community and a kind of a person from where we were expecting a moderate kind of threats.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Elisa, could you just talk us through step by step as much as you can what the process was once you received the kind of legal notices from Arthur Chakade's team? What happened next and what's happening to it now?
Okay. To be clear, it never materialized.
Okay.
The threat. They just posted this statement on their Facebook page that they intend to do such and such, but it never materialized. So when it was first made public, that statement, it was unsettling at first. But then days, weeks went by and nothing really came into our office. So that's a relief. But then, yeah, the threat is, I think the threat is there. At first, my editors even thought that it may be better to have PCIJ as byline instead of just my sole name, just to protect me against these threats. But we believe that the report was made diligently and we did our work very carefully, that it meant to have that sole byline with my name.
Okay, that's great. And so to be clear, you've had no kind of legal threats actually materialize, which is okay. Yeah, that's a different tactic. Thank you. Some questions coming in about the actual kind of logistics, how you put this network together, and this again possibly Will as the starting point. You obviously have a network of some trusted partners that you work with very frequently, and then you're bringing people on board. Can you talk us a little bit through how you select and crucially how you create this network that's both trusted and secure, so things don't leak and you don't kind of scoop each other?
Well, obviously the selection of partners is really one of the most important things that we can do at ICIJ. If we let in one unreliable or untrustworthy journalist into the ICIJ family, then it only takes one reporter to ruin the whole thing. Panama Papers could have been leaked or revealed months in advance, or the data could have been shared with a government agency. So it's something that people like I who work full-time at ICIJ take very seriously and have many restless nights on. It's also something that we work on long-term throughout the year. Reporters like Umar have worked with ICIJ for a long time. So we know as soon as we get data that we're going to go back to Umar and say, are you interested? Obviously, no reporter in the world is obliged to work with us. Next time Umar receives a call from Schiller at ICIJ, Umar could hang up and, we might never hear from him again. I hope not, but there's no obligation in this world. What we try and do is kind of identify reporters who share similar values. And those values are, of course, being an investigative reporter, but being a collaborative investigative reporter. And those things don't always go together. There are many wonderful investigative journalists out there who I respect highly, but who will openly tell you collaboration just isn't for me. And to be honest, I have enough to do with my own reporting and my own coordination that I don't have time to go chasing after reporters who don't want to do the Pandora Papers, right? Second of all, ICIJ spends a lot of time trying to expand our membership and our partnerships. 600 reporters sounds like a lot, but let's not forget that Pandora Papers still didn't have reporters from many countries in the world. I think of places in Africa or Asia or the Middle East. Usually now where press freedoms are significant, press freedom curtailments are significant, places like Vietnam, places like Singapore even, that maybe we don't think of as often. Democratic Republic of Congo, countries that have real media restrictions. I and my colleagues spend a long time identifying reporters throughout the year and communicating with them, because to be honest, I want to know that if you work on Pandora Papers, you're going to respond to my WhatsApp message or to my email. And so it's almost a bit like dating in that you make the initial contact and then you have a period of courtship in which you kind of introduce yourself, you determine whether or not your styles and your work philosophies match. And if they do, then welcome to the family. because the great thing, but also the terrifying thing about ICIJ's model is once you're in, you're in. As I say, Alyssa didn't just have access to the Filipino Pandora Papers documents. Alyssa had access to everything. So if Alyssa and her team wanted to write about Vladimir Putin's friends, or the president of Ecuador, for example, they could definitely do that. And that's a great part of the system, but that also obviously involves a higher risk and a higher level of conflict between journalists around the world. And look, I can assure you, let's not pretend that the Pandora Papers and that ICIJ's model works smoothly all the time. There are lots of minor tensions and mini World War IIIs that are always threatening to erupt. But again, because of ICIJ's experience with this and because of the kind and personalities of journalists that we have, we usually manage to keep those below the surface.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Umar, if I can kind of go to that and shake off the image of dating from my head. How do you're part of Network, and I'm really interested to know how you then work with other parts of the ICIJ network in the region, because I can easily see tensions arising between stories that you're working on and then stories that kind of Indian partners are working on, Bangladeshi partners on, and who manages these kind of relationships? How does it work?
Yeah, actually, the news manages the relationship, the kind of information we have, and the one who is taking lead, and where the most of the information is coming from. So, for example, if there is an information coming from India, we would heavily rely on our Indian partners. And unfortunately, our region is not well integrated like, the Africa or, the Latin America. So here, a lot of things the stories are detached. But we rather become very excited if there is something connecting the region, if there is a news that become a source of this connection. And there we happily connect. The reason being because it rarely happens, and that is a pleasant surprise for us.
Okay, thank you. And when it does happen, it just kind of happens through this collaborative model. Does it tend to be that the people whose countries are the focus take charge?
Yeah, when we work on it, the platform that we access and where we contact with each other, sometime I realize that there are many small universes in the big universe. There are different journalists. For example, I'm reaching out to a guy from UK or from Canada if there is a story in Pakistan and going there. And if it is in the region, I will be checking with the Indian guys and from the Bangladeshi and other guys. So it's really, very fascinating experience, that how this information and how needs to gather information connect us and bring us closer to each other and make us relevant to each other.
Thank you.
I would say, Mira, if I could just jump in practically
Sure.
there, that, when a new partner is brought on from a country, we make it as clear as we can that even though all journalists have access to and the right to report on every topic, if and when there is a journalist from a country, then they have priority and they are the leaders on any story that comes from that country. So if you're a journalist in The Guardian in the UK, for example, and you're interested, as of course any journalist would be, on a story about Imran Khan's allies, for example, notwithstanding that potentially huge international story, you work definitely in partnership and really in practice secondarily to someone like Umar because it is his national story. And behind the scenes, once again, ICIJ is often kind of doing what it can to make sure that those informal but very important rules are respected, because otherwise the big boys and the big girls would always overpower, and that's not what we want. We want the newsroom in Burkina Faso to have just as much weight as the Washington Post.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That's kind of what I was getting at. And Alyssa, as the kind of person who came into this network, what were the concrete steps that were made to integrate you into the ICIJ and build this trust? Because you're being asked to put your own credibility on the line, your own safety on the line here for this network of people, most of whom don't live in your country. So I'd really be interested to know what happened and what your thinking was.
So Will mentioned about the team behind this project in the Philippines. So that's Miss Carol Ilagan, who led this reporting for the Philippines, for the Philippines Pandora Papers. And she was the one who really briefed me on what it is, what it entails to do, the tools that it needs to be tinkered on, because it is quite complicated at times, and the reporting that needs to be made, etc. So there were some steps, and to be honest, I don't think there was like a test or anything. It was like I was pushed into it. Like, yeah, that's the project. But I think as any journalist would be very excited to take on it. It's a very exciting treasure trove of information, and I think the challenge now is how do you like make sense of all of that information and make it relevant to your audiences in your respective countries. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I mean, you referred to the tools used, and I'd really like to kind of ask you more about this, and because I've got you on screen, Alyssa, I'll start with you. What are the tools the ICIJ provided that you found most useful?
So the ICIJ had this platform called, can I share it? It's Data Share. So on the platform, you have all the PDFs of all the files that we can use, or we can check for verification of all the people involved in the leak. So I think that's the biggest part of the project, because it allowed us to, manually check all the PDFs and all the emails and message threads. So that's been very helpful. And this is the first time I've encountered of encrypted emails. It was quite difficult to get on it at first, but yeah, I got the hang of it eventually, to see emails and not really see the messages, and have to have a different app for that. So yeah, those have been helpful.
Thank you very much. Well, can I go back to you, without selling my state secrets, but security in particular? Can you talk us a little bit about both the, where the database is hosted, how it's shared, amongst contributors, how you protect sources in the network?
Sure. So like Alyssa said, you can't work on an ICIJ project now unless you know how to use encrypted email. So anyone out there listening to this panel, familiarize yourself with how that works. These days it's easy and it's free. Although, as Alyssa said, at least for the first week or so, it does make you want to pull your hair out, but you get used to it. So once the journalist has that, we at ICIJ onboard them to our secure databases. There are two of them, really. One of them, like Alyssa said, where the 12 million leaked files are hosted. That's accessible only through password and through multiple layers of security, including two-factor authentication with Google, for example. At ICIJ, we have an IT specialist whose job really is to help every journalist who needs it get on board with that. And then the second database that we have, or platform really, is the collaborative platform, a bit like a Facebook for journalists, where reporters are encouraged to share all of their findings, so that as soon as you find the name of the Minister of Transport in the database, you share that with the global team for a number of reasons. It helps motivate us all. It helps us with the story to get the global count of politicians involved. It also allows the reporter to ask help from questions in London or France if there's an international connection. So security obviously is crucial to all of this. It all starts with encryption, but then every step along the way, reporters are helped by ICIJ. We also, as much as possible, try and avoid WhatsApp where we can these days. I don't know how widespread that is across the world, and I know that there are different geographical preferences, but certainly that's becoming more and more common.
Okay. And have you had any leaks or kind of attacks in your system that have got through?
Leaks of leaks? I think after publication, we're often attacked with denial of service, DDoS, is that right? That may or may not be related to the investigation. Nothing has happened this time around, to my knowledge. I mean, it's the kind of thing that keeps all of us up at night, right? Because it only takes one errant email that wasn't encrypted for the whole system to go down. But ICIJ has, half of ICIJ really is computer and tech and IT specialists. which is probably pretty unusual for a newsroom these days. So rest assured that they are ready and waiting to respond if something like that happens, but touch wood, not so far.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And question from Alex Murray, one of our journalists from the BBC. What's the balance between using the documents to discover completely new stories as opposed to standing up or moving on stories that are already in motion? And I'll put that to Umar, if that's okay, to start, because I think you've been working on this for a very long time.
Can you say again, please?
How many of the stories from the Pandora Papers were brand new that came about purely because you found the documents and built the stories from there? And which ones were helping you develop or prove stories that you'd already been working on?
Yeah, I think many of them were new for me because, in a way that the characters may be the same, but at times it happens and there is different information, and that is totally unrelated with what we are already working. So that makes it a new story for us. Yes, there were some stories. For example, there were some questions in my mind. We were working on a story about a fake diploma mill, operating from Pakistan, selling fake degrees throughout the world. So I was working on it, and there were some questions that what is their financial system, that how do they collect the money? And we could find in these papers that they had an offshore company which was used for opening accounts. So that was in furtherance to what I was already doing.
Okay, thank you. Will, what have you tended to find in that amongst the partners?
Well, I think that's one of the joys of these databases and frustrations, is you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
There's a point that I always try and make is, look, everyone wants this data to have their president, their president's wife. Every journalist wants to find the big fish. That's not how it works. And some countries are really lucky. The president of Kenya, for example, the president of Ecuador, the president of Chile. Other countries are really unlucky. South Africa, for example, despite many leaks like this, has never had one of their presidents involved. It's interesting to see that sometimes that turns off journalists. Alyssa said earlier that every journalist in the world would like to be involved in this. Unfortunately, that's not true. I spend a lot of my time trying to invite journalists onto this project, telling them about it, setting them up with accounts, and then they'll disappear. I won't give any names and I won't give any countries, but I think that speaks to really the kind of journalism that you need to enjoy these kind of projects. It's not journalism where the stories are immediately present. You can't just log into the database, find a name, and then, hey presto, here's my Pandora Papers investigation. I think that's often because the Pandora Papers, as the question suggests, sometimes they'll provide 5% of new information to a pre-existing theory or story. Think about the Pandora Papers story around the alleged girlfriend of Vladimir Putin. We only found her name because a previous Russian investigation from a different media outlet had named her publicly. So we took that name, entered it into the Pandora Papers, and to our surprise, or maybe not, given how pessimistic you are about Russian offshore wealth, found that she had a luxury property in Monaco, for example. But we never would have found that had a previous investigation not been done on her. Other times, of course, this data actually isn't just about tapping in names. I spent some time reporting on the United States as a tax haven, and I did that because I was interested in South Dakota. And I didn't know who or what was using South Dakota, but I spent weeks researching a geographic location and a city, and then building up my own database of who was using South Dakota as a tax haven. And so I didn't go into that story with any particular pre-existing ideas about names of individuals. Rather, the story came about through a theory or a hypothesis, like we all have as investigative reporters. So I think in answer to the initial question, it's really both. What's wonderful about these leaks is they can help advance existing stories. We all want to find the answer to the mystery of where did President Marcos's billions go? Or, where did all of President Sani Abacha's billions go? And if we could find a new shell company about President Mobutu in the Congo, that'd be great. But it's equally as wonderful to find an entirely new line of inquiry, as we often find, politicians who have never declared what they've owned, as Alyssa did, for example.
Yeah. Alyssa, what are you going to carry on working on that's related to this? Will you?
So we're still hoping to work on another story about the leak, or about the document we found on the leak, but we're not going to say anything yet about it. But I would just want to jump on what Will mentioned about the frustrations, because for weeks we actually didn't find any politically exposed persons from the Philippines until, bam, few weeks after we found Mr. Togade in the leak. So I think it's a combination of luck and just really being diligent on the research. He mentioned about creating your own database and then just searching for the names there. I think it's also important to have like initial research about the climate or about the politics or the environment of the country that you're trying to report on. Having that strong sense of research and background really helps in developing stories when you have these kinds of picks.
I mean, with the Togade story, were you looking for his name in particular, or tell me a little bit about how it came about, how you found it, and why you found it, really? Like what were you looking for?
Yeah, so when I wasn't really looking for him, I was checking the names of the cabinet members of our current president Rodrigo Duterte. So he's one of those, he's the transport secretary of our currently. And at first I was looking at Davao City, because that's the hometown of President Duterte. When I found Davao, there were other files that came up with Philippines on the documents. And then one of the documents I found there was Mr. Togade, a document that pointing to him. So, sometimes the documents just show up like that out of just research on a certain different topic. And then you found this. I think it's really just luck sometimes.
Luck, but the harder you work, the luckier you get, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
But a question to all three of you again about the data. How easy is it to clean up the data, and when it arrives? I'm really fascinated to know what state it is in when it arrives, and how much time goes into sifting it, and then how easy it is to scrape data. And Umar, has it been different? You mentioned this is far more complex than the Panama Papers, but whether the tools have got better, or journalists have got better at knowing what they're looking for.
First of all, it's really it's quite an addictive experience, because I can only say that had it not been published yet, I would still have been exploring it, because all the time, even when there is a news, one wonder if there is somebody in the spotlight. I tend to check his name if he is there or not. Yeah. So sometimes there is a kind of phishing. Sometimes you just do the target search, that if you have some idea in mind, or if you got initial information from it and you keep exploring it, unless there is something that we are missing. Overall, it was it was user friendly, and yes, I think that when I compare it with the Panama Papers, in Panama Papers there were a kind of zip files, as well as if you there might be multiple, and if you get to the last one, quite likely you have all the information in it. Here it was different, but what I found, it was more informative, and sometimes there were some very candid conversations going on, and detailed information, which was not the case then. But overall, when you have not something to do, you are digging into it. When you have something to do, you are digging into it. So, it's really time consuming, but at the same time, it's not boring. It's, just a deep fishing. And, all the time I realized that, and I still cannot say that if I was able to, find all the people who I were looking for. So quite likely there might be someone I had missed, and they might have some companies. Their name might not be there, but they must have some traces. They must have some links with what we already found.
Yeah, Mira, I'm sure that we haven't found all of the important people or stories. I found a former Prime Minister of Somalia a few weeks ago, long after publication, and obviously we had a lot of effort put into trying to find former and current heads of state or country leaders, so we missed that one. The data, we shouldn't make it sound as though this data is easily structured or simple to search, right? The data is dependent on how the leaked material comes to us. As you said in your presentation, this is from 14 different offshore providers, so that means 14 different companies who each have their own management and archival systems. Some of them are well organized, some of them are spreadsheets, like the president of Congo that says he owns this company in the British Virgin Islands created in 1999. Other companies didn't have well managed archives, and sometimes we rely on handwritten information. I found Elton John, the singer, because I was searching for the West African country of Togo, because Elton John used an offshore company to own logos, and logo in the computer system was read as Togo. So there's always a bit of chance there. And, I think let's remember too that when Alyssa says something as modest as I found the transport minister, it's also not just that, right? It's finding a name, but then spending time understanding, what does all this mean? What does his name on page 7 of a document actually tell me about what he owned, when it was created, what it was used for, whether or not he actually owned it? Because saying someone owned an offshore company is actually much more significant and much more legally important than saying that they had an interest in it or they had shares in it. So we as reporters spend a lot of time going through minute detail to really put all of that together. We don't just stumble across these things as much as we might like to.
Yeah, I got that very clearly. That's what I was kind of saying, like, how do you even know what you're looking for? And I think you need to come at it with a huge level of expertise being held in your mind all the time.
Right, and that's one of the good things, again, about collaborations, because I could ask Umar, is this significant? Or I did for Alyssa, can you point me to the Filipino law on that requires a minister to declare their interests, for example? Because if that doesn't exist, the story then becomes slightly different, doesn't it? Or Alyssa can ask me, what does a trust in South Dakota actually mean, and what are its practical advantages from a tax perspective? So there's lots of information sharing going on too.
I'm getting lots of questions about just the very specifics of what data tools you use. So are you using DataShare by Google or Azure? And if you don't use WhatsApp, are you using Signal or Telegram? What are you using instead?
We mostly use Signal.
Yeah.
For us, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. And do you send out recommendations, or do you tell people what to use?
We make suggestions. We can't control anything. And and I work with a lot of reporters in Western Southern Africa, where I think WhatsApp is more common still. Yeah. So, I'm not going to lie and pretend that I only use Signal. I have a lot of WhatsApp chats going, but certainly when it comes to sensitive things, we try and move it over to Signal. And it's been interesting to see how quickly that's been taken up, at least in the work that I do. Not sure about other parts of the world.
Yeah, same here. And what about workflow? What do you use as a kind of dashboard for the workflow?
Well, because everyone's editorial independent, really the only thing, so when journalists agree to participate in an ICIJ project, they agree to 3 things really. One is to not disclose the existence of the project, to not share the data with any other reporter, unless that reporter is officially part of the ICIJ team, to be collaborative, that is to not go silent, and to not publish anything before about the investigation before the universally agreed publication date. So that means even if you have a really important election 1 month before October 3, the Pandora Papers deadline, you can't use anything from the leaked data for that. Apart from that, it's really up to every journalist and newsroom to determine their own editorial process. If you are well organized and have time management processes, that's great. Many of the journalists we work with are just one person in their country, often working out of their living room at night because they've got a full-time job at a newspaper there and they're kind of doing their own thing. So there are no real rules around that, and there couldn't be. And that's another reason why it's a marvel that this kind of investigation works the way it does.
So it's basically data shared, kind of share the collaborative element of it, various messaging apps, mainly Signal, not always, and encrypted emails. And those are the three kind of things that you're using to hold. That's really, really interesting. And of course, the database itself. That's really interesting. Thank you. You touched on this well, but I'm really interested again to know how it's seen from Umar and Alyssa's perspective, the idea of gatekeepers. So with offshore companies, Britain is pretty bad, a lot of offshore companies are somehow channeled through here. And then you've also got a network with some much bigger media organizations. How able do you feel to hold your own and to stop the presence of gatekeepers developing, where someone says the story has to come through me because it's gone through the UK courts, or because we're the Guardian and we're much bigger and we can pull this off. We can write a more nuanced or a story bringing in more actors because we have more resources. So how do you feel, the two of you, and I'll come to Will, but how do the two of you feel as part of this network?
I think being in collaboration, that makes your mind that there is nothing you have in exclusive. You have to share with others. And it's a kind of experience in itself that, this collaboration that teaches you that how united we can make a great impact instead of doing it single-handedly. And then, also the information, the kind of information that depends that, for example, there may be information about an individual, he is Pakistani, but the story is also relevant for the British journalists because, they have their properties at stakes there. But it depends that what kind of information they are interested and the kind of information I am interested. I think overall, just the feeling that it is making your story an international, and it has, it will be splashing in more than one places. That is, there is also a sense of, power, the power of journalism that, and it trains you, and the kind of environment we live in. Initially, I didn't have the idea, about this cross-border investigation, but now I realize. Initially, I used to think that, every crime starts from Pakistan and it ends in Pakistan. And this is even how the law enforcement tends to think. And a lot of time they have problem gathering information from other places. But now more I get into it, further I realize that the journalism is the answer. Even, that they can have access information through courtesy the collaboration that even the law enforcement doesn't have. So, I didn't have that feeling, but, rather I wanted, for example, if there is a story about, if there is a UK journalist have interest in it, I was happy to know. For example, we were doing a story about, the Pakistanis who had properties in London, and they were bought through the offshore companies. And Pakistan was, Pakistanis ranked at fifth position, in terms of the properties they bought. And the British were, of course, the number one, but we were not lagging behind. So the story was interesting. So the only concern we had in such a situation that there should not be conflict in the timing. So I must know that when it is being run by BBC or Guardian, so that we should coordinate accordingly. We should not be, running behind them. So we should be at the same time and at the same page.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Alyssa.
I want to echo what Umar said, that it actually made me more excited to collaborate with other partners. there was a time that we thought there was a possible collaboration between another institution from outside of the Philippines with PCIJ. But then, as Umar said, sometimes the crime, the crime ended up hitting the Philippines, but it never materialized. We tried to look into it here in the Philippines, but unfortunately, there were no more other sources who can give me more information. So yeah, I mean, we were in the thick of our reporting also for the stories that we're going to produce for the Philippines, but even then, we still made time to kind of help this institution to find possible links here in the Philippines. So it actually made me remember, or it reminded me of the spirit when you have in college, you know, when you're working on the school newspaper and everyone's just collaborating and doing something for the for a story. It's all collaborative work. It felt like that. So yeah, I think that's fortunate for us.
Thanks. Will, do you want to say something?
No, I don't have anything to add to that, Mira.
Thanks. That's both lovely from both of you, and really really painted a really wonderful picture. We've got a few minutes. I'm just going to ask about impact. And sorry, staying with you, Alyssa, and then but I want to ask all three of you. Alyssa, there's a question from the audience about the impact of the Pandora Papers in the Philippine elections. And what impact do you think it had? And do you think that the Tagade story in particular made a significant impact in that he didn't run, did it stop his run for a Senate seat?
Oh yeah. I wouldn't say the story itself is what prevented or what influenced Mr. Tagade's decision not to run for Senate anymore. But I think it's worth noting that the story was made public on the week that politicians were filing their candidacies for elections in 2022. And 2 days after the story was made public, he announced that he decided not to run anymore. So yeah, that's a development. But policy-wise, unfortunately, there hasn't been much clamor from any groups, any authority, or any government agency to make some changes on how we handle this kind of news or this kind of secret havens. Having politicians keeping these kinds of offshore investments, and I think that's a challenge for us journalists to make it more relevant to our audiences, that governments and institutions will be forced to make some changes. Yeah,
that's really important. Like, how do you stay on the story, and what are you pushing for, really? We're not.
Yeah.
Should we be pushing for policy change, or what are we publishing for? Will, how do you kind of deal with that at the ICIJ? A sense of what's the story being published for, and how are you measuring impact and outcomes?
Well, it's existential for ICIJ, really, because we put our entire organization and resources into this one investigation. We have funders who understandably want to know what the heck we've been doing with our time for the past 2 years, right? Yeah. I think impact is always comes in many different forms. And one of the big concerns and questions we had about Pandora Papers was how it would compare with Panama Papers. We all remember scenes in Pakistan where protesters were in the street, or the almost immediate resignation of the Prime Minister of Iceland, for example. That obviously didn't happen this time around for a number of reasons that I think would be worth studying. My sense, and I don't know what Alyssa and Umar sensed, was that I think politicians are smarter now, somewhat terrifyingly, about these kind of exposés. When the Panama Papers came out, I think we caught a lot of politicians flat-footed who didn't know how to answer the question intelligently. This time around, there were some very smooth responses. The president of Kenya coming out, thanking journalists for the Pandora Papers, praising transparency, and then flatly refusing ever to answer any questions about the actual substance in the first place, which was pretty remarkable. To go back to what I said, impact takes a number of forms. Some countries like the United States have acted more after the Pandora Papers than they did after the Panama Papers. We've seen draft legislation in Congress already that would introduce new restrictions on people who help wealthy people use tax havens, for example, that would be significant. We've seen obviously political ramifications in countries like the Czech Republic, in Chile, in Ecuador so far. My experience in this line of reporting has also taught me to take the long view, that, you know, it takes months and actually years really for people to be investigated, people to go to jail, and for countries to recoup or recover millions, if not billions of dollars from these kind of exposés. In some ways, the Pandora Papers is the starting gun that kicks off a lot of activity by governments around the world that we're not going to hear about for months or years to come. We know that governments are desperate for this information. ICIJ got calls from almost every tax office on the planet in the days after the Pandora Papers investigation. Just a reminder to everyone, we don't share the data with governments.
That was going to be my next question. What happens when you get the calls?
Well, we believe, and it's true, that there are, you know, governments have a lot more power and resources than us little journalists anyway, and they also have, or should have, structures in place that allow them to exchange this kind of information. This information is obtainable through other means, through official channels. And, you know, and it says that something seriously wrong with the world if the government of Pakistan or the Philippines or the United States of America can't obtain financial records about its own citizens. Because it exists, it's really just a question of will and laws in place that should allow that to happen.
Thanks. Umar, can I put that question to you that Will raised about the difference in impact between the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think Will has rightly pointed out, and I have a bit difference in terms of the interpretation. According to Will, he realized that the politicians have become smarter this time, to preempt such kind of news. I think that now the world has increasingly become more authoritarian what it was in Panama Papers. Then the institutions were relatively stronger than they are now. Now, the authoritarian rulers, they are very good. They are populist, and they are very good at capturing the narratives. For example, even what happened in Pakistan, the prime minister tweeted that, I had always been demanding that, because whatever happens, he says that this was his previous, this has been his demand for a long time. So a commission was set up that it would investigate. But nothing has been done so far. And if the history is any guide, I don't realize it will be done unless some information is needed in order to target someone. So they will pick it and weaponize it for settling political scores. Otherwise, in terms of awareness, there is a lot of awareness. Compared with the Panama Papers. But in terms of action, this time the government is lagging far behind. And ironically, this government is the one which used Panama Papers just to, for political gains, and they thought that the prime minister thought that Panama was a godsend opportunity. But this time, I don't know, who has sent this opportunity to him. He was not in need of that.
Do you think the public are reacting differently to these exposés, again, from in Pakistan and Philippines? Because we've seen demonstrations and a real kind of wave of anger with the Panama Papers. The Pandora Papers comes at a very different time. And I think the pandemic, we don't really have time to discuss, but I think, firstly, you couldn't demonstrate on the streets in many countries, but also the mood and attitudes towards government has been different.
Yeah, actually, we started publicizing the news that something is coming. So it was 24 hours before it was made public. So there was a lot of hype about it. And then there was a false positive address of our prime minister because somebody else was having the same address. So we had sent him the questions. That was not part of our story, but they tried to leak it beforehand. They realized that its story is coming about them. So that doubled the impression. People realized that even prime minister's name is also in it. So when he was not there, many people started complaining that why prime minister is not and name is not there. I said that, I cannot, I have my own limitations. I cannot include or exclude any name. So in the present situation, because there is hyperinflation and unemployment, joblessness, so in such a situation, people thought that this kind of expose could be useful for a kind of a governmental change, and for them, it didn't help.
That Donald Trump tax return
Yeah.
story. Alyssa, what's the perspective for you? You're still on mute.
I think it kind of differed the how it was received by the audience with how the news came about here. So it came on the week that the filing of candidacy for the upcoming elections were happening. So there were too much news on that week. So it was kind of I guess not the main story that week. But then I think it started some conversations about certain people, and it made some of our audience or some of the members of the public to think twice about certain personalities.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Will, is there anything you want to jump in on?
Yeah, obviously, in a number of countries around the world, there was less surprise than previously. And that, I think, is in fact tribute to the work that journalists have done over the past few years, journalists and others, of course, because many, many more people now are fluent, at least in the basic language of offshore company, tax haven, that kind of thing. That puts a much bigger responsibility on journalists to work harder to tell these stories. And really, another of the criterion that we look for in choosing partners to work with us on this project was those reporters who were interested in and willing to tell stories in a way that wasn't just, here's a politician, he's named in the Panama Papers, end of story. That, I think, is one of the more harmful things that we could have done in publishing the Pandora Papers. So it really meant that narrative storytelling became a lot more important. It meant that going 2 or 3 extra steps in making connections with outside documents, what are the legal requirements of a politician in declaring a company? Did he, she, or they do it? That kind of thing. I found it this time around actually a lot more demanding as a reporter to identify the stories that might be of interest and then to report those stories, because we knew that we couldn't rely on that novelty as much as we had in the past.
Thank you. It's been really fascinating. I think you've just kind of opened the Pandora's box, but really shown us the inner workings of what was an absolutely terrific project that was really needed this year to remind people, as you said, Umar, of the power of journalism and the importance of journalism. And also in a year when community and networks have been so hard to come by, it's been really heartening to see that you've managed to build one again, like you said, without the in-person contacts that normally fuel this, and quite remarkable, really, that there's been so much trust and so few disasters that could have happened in this kind of network. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate the hour you've given us, and thank you all listening and from all around the world as well. This is the last one of the year. We'll be back in January with the seminar series, and so wishing you all kind of a very peaceful holiday season and wonderful new year as well. And Alyssa, Will, and Umar, thank you again.
Thanks, Mira. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.